Life has a way of lulling you into a false sense of security. You wake up every morning, go through the motions, and tell yourself that everything is fine. That's exactly how I felt for years, comfortable, content, and completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. My name is Sarah, and for 15 years, I was married to a man I thought I knew inside and out. Mark was my high school sweetheart, the father of my 2 children, and the person I trusted more than anyone in the world. We had built a life together in a quiet suburban neighborhood, filled with soccer games, family dinners, and the occasional date night. But all of that came crashing down the day I decided to put a hidden camera in our house. It wasn't something I ever imagined doing. I wasn't the type of person to spy on my husband or invade his privacy, but something had been off for months, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was hiding something from me. It started with the little things: late nights at work, missed phone calls, and a sudden interest in his appearance. He started going to the gym more often, buying new clothes, and even wearing cologne, which he hadn't done in years. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Mark had always been a devoted husband and father, and I had no reason to doubt him. But then the whispers started. Friends would give me sideways glances when they thought I wasn't looking, and I caught snippets of conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked into the room. I tried to brush it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with each passing day. The final straw came when I found a receipt in Mark's jacket pocket for a hotel room downtown. It was dated for a night he had told me he was working late. My heart sank as I stared at the piece of paper, my mind racing with possibilities. I confronted him about it, but he brushed it off, saying it was for a client meeting that had run late. He even showed me an email from his boss to back up his story. I wanted to believe him, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't being entirely honest. That's when I made the decision to put a hidden camera in our house. I know it sounds extreme, but I needed to know the truth. I ordered a small, discreet camera online and installed it in the living room, the one place where Mark spent most of his time when he was home. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, that I would delete the footage as soon as I saw that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew I was preparing for the worst. The first few days were uneventful. The camera captured the usual chaos of family life: kids running around, Mark watching TV, and me trying to keep everything together. But then, on the 3rd day, something happened that changed everything. I was at work when I got a notification on my phone that the camera had detected motion. I opened the app and saw Mark walking into the living room with a woman I didn't recognize. My heart stopped as I watched them sit down on the couch, their body language unmistakably intimate. I felt like I was going to be sick as I watched them talk and laugh, their hands brushing against each other in a way that left no doubt about what was going on. I wanted to look away, to close the app and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I couldn't. I was frozen, my eyes glued to the screen as the woman leaned in and kissed Mark. It was a kiss that spoke of familiarity, of a relationship that had been going on for far longer than I had suspected. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My hands trembled as I continued to watch, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The woman was beautiful, with long dark hair and a confident demeanor that made me feel small and insignificant in comparison. She was everything I wasn't: young, glamorous, and seemingly carefree. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but also a deep, aching sadness. How could Mark do this to me? To our family? I had always trusted him, always believed that we were in this together. But now, watching him with this woman, I realized that I had been living in a fantasy. The man I thought I knew was a stranger, and my life, as I knew it, was over. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront Mark right then and there, to scream and cry and demand an explanation. But another part of me knew that I needed to be smart about this. If I confronted him without proof, he would just deny it, and I would be left with nothing. So I kept watching, my heart breaking with every passing second. The woman I later found out her name was Claire stayed for hours, and the footage captured everything. They talked, they laughed, and they kissed, their connection undeniable. I felt like I was watching a movie, like this couldn't possibly be my life. But it was, and I had to face the reality that my marriage was over. When Mark finally left the house that evening, I felt a strange sense of relief. At least now I knew the truth, as painful as it was. But as I sat there, staring at the screen, I realized that this was just the beginning. There were so many questions I needed answers to. How long had this been going on? Who was Claire, really? And why had Mark chosen to betray me in such a devastating way? I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I needed to take control of the situation to protect myself and my children from the fallout. But how? I didn't have a plan, but I knew I couldn't let Mark get away with this. I had to find a way to expose the truth, to make him face the consequences of his actions. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, I began to plot my next move. Little did I know, the journey I was about to embark on would take me to places I never could have imagined, revealing secrets more shocking than I ever thought possible. This was just the beginning of a story that would change my life forever. The days that followed the discovery of Mark's affair were a blur of emotions. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the footage of him and Claire together, their laughter echoing in my mind like a cruel taunt. I wanted to confront him, to scream and cry and demand answers, but I knew I had to be careful. If I acted too soon, he would deny everything, and I would be left with nothing but my suspicions. So I kept my pain to myself, pretending everything was normal while I plotted my next move. The first thing I did was gather more evidence. I needed to know the full extent of Mark's betrayal, and that meant digging deeper into his life. I started by going through his phone when he was in the shower, scrolling through his messages and call logs. At first, I didn't find anything incriminating, just the usual texts from work colleagues and friends. But then I noticed a number that appeared frequently, always late at night or early in the morning. My heart raced as I realized it was Claire's number. I quickly memorized it and began to piece together their relationship. They had been talking for months, their messages growing increasingly intimate over time. I felt sick as I read their conversations. The words on the screen a painful reminder of how far Mark had strayed from our marriage. But as I dug deeper, I realized there was more to this story than just an affair. Claire wasn't just some random woman Mark had met, she was someone from his past. Someone he had known long before we ever got married. I found old photos of them together, their smiles bright and carefree. And my stomach churned as I realized their connection went back years. Who was she really? And why had Mark kept her secret from me all this time? Determined to find answers, I decided to do some digging of my own. I started by searching Claire's name online, hoping to find some clue about who she was and what she wanted with Mark. What I found shocked me. Claire wasn't just a former flame, she was a successful businesswoman, with a reputation for being ruthless and manipulative. She had been involved in several high-profile scandals, including a lawsuit from a former business partner who accused her of fraud. The more I read, the more I realized that Claire was dangerous and Mark was in way over his head. But why? What did she want from him? And why had he risked everything, our marriage, our family, our life together for her? I needed to know, and I wasn't going to stop until I had the truth. My next step was to confront Mark, but not in the way he would expect. I decided to play along, to act like everything was fine while I gathered more information. I started paying closer attention to his behavior, noting every late night, every missed call, every excuse that didn't quite add up. I even followed him one evening, trailing his car as he drove to a part of town I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as I watched him pull into the parking lot of a small, nondescript building. I parked a few spaces away and watched as he walked inside, my mind racing with possibilities. What was he doing here? And who was he meeting? I waited for what felt like hours, my anxiety growing with each passing minute. Finally, Mark emerged, but he wasn't alone. Claire was with him, her arm linked through his as they walked to his car. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but also a strange sense of relief. At least now I knew for sure. I took a few photos with my phone, my hands trembling as I captured the moment. This was the proof I needed, but it wasn't enough. I needed to know what they were doing, what they were planning. So I decided to take a risk. I waited until they drove away, then approached the building they had come out of. It was a small office space, with a sign on the door that read C and a consulting. I had never heard of it before, and a quick search on my phone revealed nothing. Who were they, and what were they consulting on? I needed to find out. The next day, I called the number listed on the sign, pretending to be a potential client. The woman who answered was polite but vague, telling me that C and a consulting specialized in strategic business solutions. When I pressed for more information, she became evasive, saying that all inquiries had to go through the company's CEO, Claire Reynolds. My heart skipped a beat as I realized who I was dealing with. Claire wasn't just Mark's mistress, she was his business partner. And from the looks of it, their partnership went far beyond the boardroom. I felt a surge of anger as I realized the extent of Mark's betrayal. He hadn't just cheated on me, he had lied to me, deceived me, and put our family at risk for the sake of his own greed. I needed to confront him to make him see the damage he had caused. But I also knew I had to be smart about it. If I confronted him too soon, he would just deny everything, and I would be left with nothing. So I decided to bide my time, to gather more evidence before making my move. Over the next few weeks, I continued to monitor Mark's activities, using the hidden camera and my own sleuthing skills to piece together the puzzle. What I discovered was shocking. Mark and Claire weren't just having an affair, they were involved in a complex scheme to defraud their clients, using their consulting business as a front. They had been siphoning money from unsuspecting investors, funneling it into offshore accounts and using it to fund their lavish lifestyle. I felt sick as I realized the extent of their deception. Mark wasn't just a cheater, he was a criminal, and he had dragged me and our children into his mess. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. Should I confront him? Should I go to the police? Or should I try to take matters into my own hands? As I sat there, staring at the evidence I had gathered, I realized that this was just the beginning. The journey I was about to embark on would take me to places I never could have imagined, revealing secrets more shocking than I ever thought possible. But I was ready. I had faced the truth, and now it was time to fight back. The more I uncovered about Mark and Claire's scheme, the more I realized how deep the rabbit hole went. It wasn't just about their affair or even the fraudulent consulting business, it was about power, control, and a web of lies that stretched far beyond what I could have imagined. I knew I had to act carefully, but I also knew I couldn't let them get away with what they were doing. My first step was to protect myself and my children. I quietly consulted a lawyer, explaining the situation without revealing all the details. She advised me to gather as much evidence as possible and to avoid confronting Mark until we had a solid case. I followed her advice, continuing to monitor Mark's activities while pretending everything was normal at home. It was exhausting, playing the role of the oblivious wife while my heart was breaking. But I knew it was necessary. One evening, as I was reviewing the footage from the hidden camera, I noticed something unusual. Mark and Claire were in the living room, but they weren't alone. A third person, a man I didn't recognize, was with them. They were speaking in hushed tones, their expressions serious. I strained to hear what they were saying, but the audio was too muffled. All I could catch was snippets of conversation, offshore accounts, wire transfers. And keep it quiet. My stomach churned as I realized this wasn't just a two-person operation. Mark and Claire were part of something much bigger. And the man in the room was clearly someone important. I needed to find out who he was. Using the footage, I took screenshots of the man's face and ran a reverse image search online. To my shock, I discovered he was a well-known financier with ties to several high-profile scandals. His name was Robert Hayes, and he had a reputation for being ruthless and untouchable. The fact that he was meeting with Mark and Claire in our living room sent a chill down my spine. What had Mark gotten himself into? And how had he become involved with someone like Robert Hayes? Determined to find answers, I decided to take a risk. I followed Mark the next time he left the house, trailing him to a sleek office building downtown. He met Claire there, and together they entered the building. I waited outside, my heart pounding, until I saw Robert Hayes arrive. He joined them inside, and I knew I had to find out what was going on. I managed to slip into the building behind a group of employees, blending in as best as I could. I followed Mark, Claire, and Robert to a conference room on the top floor, where they were joined by several other people I didn't recognize. I hid in a nearby stairwell, using my phone to record audio through the door. What I heard was shocking. They were discussing a massive money laundering operation, using their consulting business as a front to move millions of dollars through offshore accounts. Mark and Claire were key players, but it was clear that Robert Hayes was the one calling the shots. I felt a surge of anger and fear as I realized the extent of their deception. Mark wasn't just cheating on me, he was involved in a criminal enterprise that could destroy our family. I knew I had to act, but I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I reached out to an old friend, someone I trusted implicitly. Her name was Lisa, and she had worked in law enforcement before retiring. I told her everything, showing her the evidence I had gathered. Lisa listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "Sarah, this is bigger than you realize. These people are dangerous, and if they find out what you know, they won't hesitate to silence you." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I knew she was right. I couldn't confront Mark or go to the police without putting myself and my children at risk. Lisa agreed to help me, and together we began to formulate a plan. We decided to gather as much evidence as possible, documenting every detail of Mark and Claire's involvement in the scheme. Lisa used her connections to dig deeper into Robert Hayes, uncovering a trail of corruption that stretched across multiple industries. The more we learned, the more dangerous the situation became. One night, as I was reviewing the latest footage from the hidden camera, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Mark and Claire were arguing, their voices raised in anger. "You're getting too reckless," Claire hissed. "If Sarah finds out, it's over for all of us." Mark scoffed, his tone dismissive. "She's clueless. She'll never figure it out." Claire's expression darkened. "Don't underestimate her. If she finds out, we'll have to deal with her permanently." My heart raced as I realized what she was implying. They weren't just willing to lie and cheat, they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. I felt a surge of panic, but also a fierce determination. I couldn't let them win. I had to protect myself and my children, no matter what it took. Lisa and I decided to take our evidence to a federal investigator she knew, someone who could handle a case of this magnitude. We met with him in secret, laying out everything we had uncovered. He listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When we finished, he looked at us and said, "This is one of the most complex cases I've ever seen. If we move forward, there's no turning back. Are you sure you're ready for this?" I nodded, my resolve unwavering. "I'm ready." The investigation moved quickly after that. Federal agents began monitoring Mark, Claire, and Robert Hayes, gathering evidence to build a case against them. I continued to play my role at home, pretending everything was normal while secretly working with Lisa and the investigators. It was a dangerous game, but I knew it was the only way to bring them down. Then, one evening, everything came to a head. Mark came home late, his expression tense. He sat down at the kitchen table and looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and fear. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice trembling. My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "What is it, Mark?" He took a deep breath, then said the words I had been dreading. "I've made a terrible mistake. I've been involved in something illegal. And now it's all falling apart." I felt a surge of emotions, anger, sadness, relief, but I kept my voice steady. "What are you talking about, Mark?" He hesitated, then began to explain. He told me about the money laundering scheme, about Claire and Robert Hayes, and about the danger they were all in. He begged for my forgiveness, saying he had been manipulated and that he never meant to hurt me. I listened in silence, my mind racing. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I could confront him with the truth. But I also knew I had to be careful. If I revealed what I knew, it could put me and my children in danger. So I played along, pretending to be shocked and hurt. I told him we would figure it out together, that we would get through this as a family. But inside, I was already planning my next move. The next day, I met with Lisa and the federal investigator. We decided it was time to act. The evidence was overwhelming, and the risk of waiting any longer was too great. That evening, as Mark and Claire met with Robert Hayes at our house, federal agents moved in. The scene was chaotic. Agents swarmed the house, arresting Mark, Claire, and Robert on the spot. I watched from the sidelines, my heart pounding as the reality of what was happening sank in. It was over. Mark was led away in handcuffs, his face pale and filled with regret. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for forgiveness, but I turned away. I couldn't bear to see the man I had once loved reduced to this. Claire and Robert were also arrested, their expressions filled with anger and defiance. As the agents took them away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a fierce determination to move forward. The investigation continued for months, uncovering a vast network of corruption that stretched across the country. Mark, Claire, and Robert were all convicted and sentenced to prison, their lives forever changed by their choices. As for me, I began the long process of rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pain and betrayal felt overwhelming. But I knew I had to keep going for the sake of my children. I filed for divorce, sold the house, and started over in a new town. It was a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and focus on the future. But even as I moved on, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The journey I had been on had changed me in ways I couldn't fully understand. And I knew that the scars would always be there. But I also knew that I had faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. And as I looked to the future, I felt a sense of hope and belief that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I had the strength to overcome them. The days leading up to the final confrontation were a whirlwind of tension and fear. I had been working closely with Lisa and the federal investigators, providing them with every piece of evidence I had gathered. The case against Mark, Claire, and Robert Hayes was solid, but I knew that taking them down wouldn't be easy. These were powerful, dangerous people, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. The investigators had planned a sting operation to catch them in the act, and I was to play a crucial role. I had to act normal to keep Mark from suspecting anything until the very last moment. It was a dangerous game, but I had no choice. The night of the operation, Mark came home unusually early. He seemed on edge, pacing the living room and checking his phone constantly. I pretended not to notice, focusing on making dinner and keeping up the facade of normalcy. But inside, my heart was racing. I knew that tonight, everything would come to a head. As we sat down to eat, Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression tightening, and excused himself to take the call. I strained to hear his conversation, but he spoke in hushed tones, his voice barely audible. When he returned, he looked even more agitated. "I have to go out for a bit," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Work stuff." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Okay. Be safe." As soon as he left, I texted Lisa and the investigators, letting them know that Mark was on the move. They had been monitoring his phone and knew exactly where he was going, a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. I followed at a safe distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The warehouse was dimly lit, with only a few cars parked outside. I parked a block away and approached on foot, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see Mark's car parked near the entrance, and my stomach churned as I realized what was about to happen. Inside, the warehouse was a hive of activity. Mark, Claire, and Robert Hayes were there, along with several other people I didn't recognize. They were gathered around a large table, discussing something in hushed tones. I hid behind a stack of crates, using my phone to record the scene. The audio was faint, but I could make out enough to know that they were finalizing the details of their next big money laundering operation. My heart raced as I realized the magnitude of what I was witnessing. These people were criminals, and they were about to pull off something huge. But before I could process what was happening, the sound of sirens filled the air. The warehouse doors burst open, and federal agents swarmed in, their guns drawn. "Everyone freeze," one of them shouted. Chaos erupted as Mark, Claire, and the others scrambled to escape. But there was no way out. The agents had the place surrounded. I watched from my hiding spot as Mark was tackled to the ground, his face a mask of shock and fear. Claire tried to run, but she was quickly apprehended, her screams echoing through the warehouse. Robert Hayes put up a fight, but he was no match for the agents. Within minutes, it was over. The criminals were in custody, and the evidence was being gathered. I felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. As the agents led Mark away in handcuffs, he caught sight of me. His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "You," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You did this." I stood my ground, my heart pounding but my resolve unwavering. "You did this to yourself, Mark. You chose this path, and now you have to face the consequences." He struggled against the agents, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, Sarah. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to let him see my fear. I turned away, focusing on the agents as they secured the scene. Lisa approached me, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. I nodded, though my hands were still trembling. "I will be. It's over now, right?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not quite. This is just the beginning. There's still a lot of work to do to bring down the entire network. But you've done your part, Sarah. You've helped us take down some of the biggest players." I felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this wasn't the end. The journey I had been on had changed me in ways I couldn't fully understand. And I knew that the scars would always be there. But I also knew that I had faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. As I looked around the warehouse, at the chaos and destruction that had been wrought, I felt a strange sense of closure. The man I had once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But I had survived. I had fought back, and I had won. And as I walked out of the warehouse, into the cool night air, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I had the strength to overcome them. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, but I was ready. I had faced the truth, and now it was time to move forward. For myself, for my children, and for the future I still believed in. The aftermath of the warehouse sting was a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and emotional turmoil. Mark, Claire, and Robert Hayes were arrested and charged with a litany of crimes, including fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The case made national headlines, with reporters digging into every detail of their operation. I tried to shield my children from the chaos, but it was impossible to completely insulate them from the fallout. They had questions, so many questions, and I did my best to answer them honestly, without overwhelming them. It was a delicate balance, one that left me emotionally drained. Mark's trial was a spectacle, with Claire and Robert turning on each other in a desperate attempt to reduce their sentences. Mark, however, remained silent, refusing to testify against his co-conspirators. His lawyer argued that he had been manipulated and coerced into participating in the scheme. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. I attended the trial, sitting in the back of the courtroom as the prosecution laid out their case. It was surreal watching the man I had once loved being portrayed as a criminal. When the verdict was finally read guilty on all counts, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but it came at a great cost. Mark was sentenced to 15 years in prison, while Claire and Robert received even longer sentences, due to their leadership roles in the operation. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt a sense of closure, but also a deep ache in my heart. The man I had married was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of our shattered life. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I filed for divorce, sold our house, and moved to a new town with my children. It was a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and focus on the future. But even as I settled into our new life, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. Claire's words from that night in the warehouse haunted me. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." I tried to push the thought aside, telling myself that it was just the ramblings of a desperate woman. But deep down, I knew there was more to the story. My suspicions were confirmed one evening when I received a letter in the mail. It was from Claire, postmarked from the prison where she was serving her sentence. My hands trembled as I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. The letter was brief but chilling. "Sarah, you think you've won, but you're wrong. There are things you don't know, things that could destroy you. If you want the truth, meet me at the prison visitor center next Saturday. Come alone." I stared at the letter, my mind racing. What could Claire possibly have to tell me? And why now, after all this time? I knew it was a risk, but I also knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That Saturday, I drove to the prison, my stomach in knots. The visitor center was cold and sterile, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I sat at a small table, waiting for Claire to be brought in. When she finally appeared, handcuffed and escorted by a guard, I barely recognized her. The confident, glamorous woman I had seen in the photos was gone, replaced by a pale, hollow-eyed version of herself. She sat down across from me, her expression unreadable. "You came," she said, her voice flat. "I didn't think you would." I folded my arms, trying to hide my nervousness. "What do you want, Claire?" She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "I want to make a deal. I'll tell you everything, things even the investigators don't know, but you have to promise to help me." I shook my head, my anger flaring. "Why would I help you? You destroyed my life." Claire's expression softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry. But this isn't just about me or Mark. It's about you, Sarah. There are people out there, powerful people, who want you silenced. If you don't help me, they'll come after you next." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I tried to stay calm. "What are you talking about?" Claire glanced around, as if afraid someone might be listening. Robert Hayes wasn't the mastermind. He was just a pawn, like Mark and me. The real power lies with someone else, someone who's still out there. And they know you're a threat. My mind raced as I tried to process what she was saying. Who? Who's behind all this? Claire hesitated, then leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. His name is Victor Kane. He's a billionaire with connections to organized crime. He's the one who orchestrated the entire operation. And he's the one who's been pulling the strings this whole time. I felt a surge of fear as I realized the magnitude of what she was telling me. Victor Kane was a name I recognized, a powerful businessman with a reputation for being untouchable. If he was involved, then this was far from over. Claire's voice broke through my thoughts. Sarah, you need to be careful. Victor doesn't take kindly to loose ends, and you're a loose end. If he finds out what you know, he won't hesitate to eliminate you. I stared at her, my heart pounding. Why are you telling me this? She sighed, her expression weary. Because I'm tired of living in fear. And because I owe you the truth. But I need your help in return. If you can get me a reduced sentence, I'll testify against Victor. Together, we can bring him down. I sat back, my mind reeling. This was bigger than I had ever imagined, and the stakes were higher than ever. But I also knew that I couldn't walk away. If Victor Kane was as dangerous as Claire claimed, then I had to do something to protect myself and my children. I agreed to Claire's terms, promising to speak to the investigators on her behalf. In return, she gave me everything she knew about Victor Kane: names, dates, locations, and more. It was enough to build a case, but it also put a target on my back. Over the next few months, I worked closely with Lisa and the federal investigators, providing them with the information Claire had given me. The case against Victor Kane was complex and dangerous, but we were determined to see it through. There were moments of doubt, times when I wondered if I was in over my head. But I refused to give up. Finally, after months of investigation, Victor Kane was arrested. The media frenzy that followed was unlike anything I had ever seen. Victor's empire crumbled as the evidence against him was made public, and his connections to organized crime were exposed. It was a victory, but it came at a cost. I had to testify in court, reliving the trauma of everything I had been through. But I did it, knowing that it was the only way to ensure justice was served. When the trial was over and Victor was sentenced to life in prison, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't felt in years. The storm had finally passed, and I was still standing. But the scars remained, a constant reminder of everything I had lost and everything I had fought for. As I stood outside the courthouse that day, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras, I felt a strange sense of peace. The journey had been long and painful, but it had also made me stronger. I had faced the truth, confronted my fears, and come out on the other side. And as I looked to the future, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I had the strength to overcome them. For myself, for my children, and for the future I still believed in.